Hello and welcome to Africa Here and Now, the conversation you've always wanted to have about the continent. I'm Martine Dennis. Today we have a real treat for you. Prepare to be blown away by some fabulous music. I recently had the pleasure of catching up with musician and composer Tunde Jegede and two brilliant young violinists, David Etim and Vincent Haastrup. Led by Tunde, who plays both the cello and the Kora, they form part of the NOK Orchestra, which specialises in African classical music. In fact, as you'll hear, the NOK Orchestra produces a sound that's a blend of African classical with Western classical music, and the result has been described as transcendental and evocative. The orchestra is based in Lagos, Nigeria, but I managed to have a chat with Tunde, David and Vincent when they were in London recently to perform and record new music, some of which you're about to hear. I started by asking Tunde how he would define African classical music.
African classical music for me is basically music from the continent that goes back millennia. So basically traces its ancestry to Egyptian times, whether that be the instruments, whether that be the musical origins. So as a young person, I studied the Kora tradition, the griot tradition from West Africa. And that's a tradition that goes back at least 700 years, just even within the Manding aspect. And that was an instrument I studied from very young. And then when I was researching further as a young person, looking into the classical traditions from across the continent, there was West Africa, there was also Ethiopian traditions, and orchestras have been set up. So there were many things, and at that time growing up in UK, they weren't really... people were not aware of those things. So really, it's been a journey of trying to bring awareness to this area of music, which is classical music from Africa.
Well, and what the NOK Orchestra produces, therefore, which in a rather unique fashion, is this fusion, isn't it, between the classical African music and Western classical music. I mean, how did that come about?
Exactly, because, well, as a young person, I also, as well as studying the Kora, the griot tradition in Gambia and Senegal, I was also studying the cello and studying Western classical music in UK. And that parallel journey basically led me to create the music that I do, which is basically draws from both African classical music and Western classical music. And that's kind of across the board in all the compositions that I've done over the years, I think.
And it's been a journey, as you say, it's been a process, hasn't it? But I think we need to point out that you come from a well-established family of illustrious musicians, don't you?
Yeah, well, as I said, I studied with one of the 5 principal griot families, the Jabati family in Gambia, West Africa. And my teacher, Amadou Bansain Jabati, was one of the master kora players of his generation. Sadly, he's passed away now. And so within the Jabati family, you have in Mali, that branch of the family, you have people like Toumani Diabati and Sidiki Diabati. In Gambia, you have like my sister also plays on the Jabati. So so it's basically it's a broad family that has a musical legacy really that goes back 108 generations.
Tell us what a kora is and what it represents in terms of West African culture.
The Kora is the 21-string West African harp lute. It was one of the main instruments of the griots being not just musicians, but chroniclers of the history. It's an oral tradition passed down from generation to generation. And really, the griots were figureheads in the society and I would say brought cohesion in times of crisis, as well as, both in good times and in bad times. Their job really socially was to bring cohesion. Because of their knowledge of genealogy, they were the keepers of the genealogy of their societies. They were also the ones that held an awareness and knowledge of the past in order to try and form generations of the present, wise ways, hopefully, to conduct themselves in the present. The griot tradition is a very long-standing tradition that has. And it's not just, I studied it within the Manding society within Gambia, but it's also, you find griots across many different societies across West Africa, playing that same kind of role within society.
So you're steeped in the ancient traditions of West Africa in particular, but you're also cognizant of the musical traditions of other parts of the continent. What about the London side of things? Because, I mean, you were studying cello also from a young age, weren't you? So it's kind of inevitable that at some point there was going to be this fusion.
At some point, yeah. I try to avoid the word fusion over the years, just because.
Oops, sorry.
No. I mean, no, but it's because a lot of people often use it, but I used to prefer the term synthesis, and that's because, for me, it was bringing those traditions together was really something that was from inside out, not outside in. And generally, often you get a lot of fusion. Why I'm more reserved about it in this period is because you have so much fusion supposedly going on in this period where you're putting this with that and all those kind of things. But actually, for me, I was in a generation where we were the second generation. So parents came to UK from somewhere else, and then we were the first generation that were born in UK. And so we had that challenge directly, both in how we lived and also in things that we created, whether that was musical or arts. And so really this was things that came from inside our experience and then was expressed outward. It was not something like I grew up studying the cello, as you said, and I grew up studying the Kora. So it was not alien for me to then try to find a way to make the things in my life cohesive and work together. Whereas often what you find in the concepts of fusion is it's somebody from one place meeting someone from another place and they're coming together to try and make something work, which is great, but that's a different kind of journey. So people that were of my generation who were doing similar things but in other areas, you had people like Vincent, who's doing it for the Indian classical and etc., and working within reggae and drum and bass. You had people like Nitin Sawhney, who was also doing it. So there were quite a lot of us in that period, and people from the Caribbean also were doing similar things like Courtney Pine, etc. So we were all doing similar things in like we were looking at where we'd come from culturally and then where we were and how to make those things synergize. So that's why I prefer the term synthesis in that context, musically speaking.
Okay, noted, duly noted, Tunde. But it comes together for you, doesn't it, at the point at which you start to compose rather than just play music?
Yeah, I mean, early on, I studied the two traditions in parallel, but they didn't really speak to one another, if I was honest, because I was studying in a Western classical, studying in Purcell School of Music, which was a music school, studying Western classical music. Then I was going to Gambia, studying the Kora, and there was no meeting point. They were completely separate. And only when I started to reach my teens, I met some of the young people I mentioned, like Talvin Singh, like Courtney Pine, the Jazz Warriors. And actually, it was my interest in jazz and other forms of music that began to trigger me creating my own music. And that's the first time I started to put Kora with cello, cello's pitch bass and things like that. And then I created a group called the Jazz Griots, which was, when I was like 18, 19. And then I started to write music for that. And then after that, gradually came to composition through working with musicians on a practical level, whether that was jazz musicians, African musicians, and classical musicians. So it was out of a need to try and make sense of the worlds that I was working in and the music that I was working in.
All right, then fast forward now to the NOK Orchestra. Now, I had to look it up, I must confess, and I was delighted to discover that there was an ancient culture in northern Nigeria, but possibly having come from the Sahel, and that was the NOK civilization. What sort of inspiration do you draw from that, and why have you named your orchestra after that in particular?
Well, because basically in around 2013, 14, no, actually 2012, I first went to Nigeria to work with some musicians in Nigeria who were part of the Abuja Philharmonic. And a lot of those musicians had come from Muzon, which is a music school and institution in Nigeria. And having met them, I then later was appointed artistic director of Muzon in about 2014. And so I went to Nigeria as director of artist director of Muzon to work there, both in the music school, which they still have a very strong music school, which people, young Nigerians graduate every year, doing opera, classical music, and jazz studies there, and also working with the orchestral players and people that had graduated at the Muzon Center, which is one of the main music institutions and halls in Lagos, Nigeria. And so that's where I met and worked with many of the young players in the NOK Orchestra, some of which we have here. And basically, in that period, most of the players had studied Western classical music to a very high level, but obviously we're also in being in Nigeria, being exposed to the cultural milieu that is Lagos as well as wider Nigeria. There are so many different cultural elements that they're surrounded by, and I think it was interesting to me to see, one, looking forwards, because a lot of the musicians are young musicians, looking forward to see what they can bring to the world in terms of the future, but then also looking back to really have a sense of their cultural origins and who they are on the world platform. So as they come out into the world, they have a strong sense of who they are culturally. And so that's why the NOK really is about anchoring them in their homeland as they come out into the wider world, and for the wider world to see the rich cultural resources that Nigeria has.
We're very lucky to have Vincent Haastrup as well as David Etim. David, let's start with you. You rocked up at the Muzon Center, and what were you studying there?
Yeah, I was studying music performance.
What kind of music?
Classical music, actually, but then it was majorly violin performance. I mean, when you go study, you're exposed to a lot of, you're exposed to all genres, classical, jazz, and contemporary music. But we had like a wider appeal for classical music, and we taught that a lot.
What, so, Western classical or African classical?
Western classical, yeah, Western classical. I mean, African classical music is ours. Yeah, it was both, but African classical music is ours, But that was the reason why I feel Muzon was even established, for awareness, and for, because we don't have that really. And that's like the only music school there that has such kind of tutoring to that high level, to that high standard.
Vincent, what about you? Was it always violin for you, Vincent?
Yeah, it's always been violin. I've always been a violin major.
And growing up, were you aware of African classical music?
Not really. I mean, I didn't see it like African classical music. It's just music.
I mean, chaps of your age, perhaps more associated with Afrobeats or much more popular genres of music. Why have you decided that African classical music is where you want to be?
I like the seriousness to it. It's not just a joke. Like, you don't have to just beat about the bush to make music. There's a seriousness. There's a particular order to it. So, and I like that.
Are there particular techniques? I mean, I'm not a violinist, as you can probably tell, but are there particular techniques that are used in playing African classical music on the violin as opposed to Western classical music on the violin? Are there different styles that you employ? No,
they're not. I mean, techniques belong to the Western anyways, but the rhythm, is mostly the rhythm, but technical wise, and everything is not. It wasn't African. It's all from Western mostly, because it's a violin. You have to, although there are other history. I mean, the history of violin dates back to all these African in the real sense. But the techniques we use today are from inspired by the Western. But then what we have is just the rhythm basically. But every other thing is mostly from Western. I mean, we just got the rhythm and the vibe, but the technical aspect of it is Western.
And David, you've always been a violinist, right?
Yes, I've always been. But
And how do you find playing African classical music, or this synthesis that Tunde has been telling us about?
yeah, playing African classical music for me has been a different. It's like a different world, so to speak. It's like you're trying to speak the same language, but something that has more depth in it. Like, because it's very expressive in that sense. Like I said, we've been exposed to classical music and doing all of that. But the moment we started delving deeper into African music, it just felt like there was something we had inside us that we could not express until now, and that's what makes it so interesting for me when I play it. Like, it feels like I'm speaking my language. There's that freedom, there's that you cannot just see on paper. You can't sight play that. You can only feel it when you play it and express it better because you're from there and you have that rhythm already in you. And so it's been a very nice, amazing journey for me, so to speak.
I've noticed that the NOK Orchestra wears white. Is that significant? Is that significant for the orchestra, its branding, or does it come from anything in terms of the NOK civilization? Tunde, are you going to answer that one?
Yeah, not so much the NOK civilization, but for me, I think traditionally in Western classical music, it was black and DJs, and there's a history to that as well in terms of where musicians were seen within the society, in Western society. In a way, servants. They were in that class bracket, hence the dress sense comes from that, tails, etc. Now, for me, coming again from a very different cultural place and musicians in a very different society, I see musicians more as coming with a spiritual force, and therefore it's more about the spirituality of those artists, the spirituality that I wanted to come across in the way that we play, in the way that we express ourselves, and even in the way that we dress. So therefore that's why I left that kind of dress behind, because I didn't feel that was appropriate for where we particularly were coming from in terms of our sound and our music. And so yeah, I would say that we there at the Wigmore Hall we had we were dressed in black, and we had AfricaHere waistcoats with AfricaHere, which is a Nigerian textile designs. So it's not always white, but it's things that speak to the culture of the music, where the music's coming from. I think it's important, and to depart from not just to copy what's gone before, but actually come again from the starting board with a new canvas.
So I'm wondering then, where do you get the best reception? I mean, do you get the best reception to your music here in Europe, or in Africa itself? What about Asia? I mean, where do you get the best kind of response?
That's very hard to say, because I've had good response in different places. I think Wigmore Hall was very electric the other night, for definitely.
Yeah, there's been more response in foreign country than in our country. Funny enough, there's been great response here.
And do you find that your audiences are older or younger? I mean, What about young Nigerians? Are they keen on what you're doing? Vincent and David, let me put that to you two as the young guys here. What do your friends and associates think of what you do?
Yeah, that question really varies, yeah. But I would say a lot of them are getting to understand that it's something that can be relatable with, because a lot of them are often exposed to African classical music in terms of choral. They sing in choir and stuff. Even in churches, they're exposed to even African classical music like that. But I don't think but in this level, most of them are really exposed to that extent to own it and believe that, oh yeah, this is something that can be expressed in this manner. I feel it's a gradual process, and that's why the NOK Orchestra is here to express that and make people really understand like the movement. It's more like a movement, and and more to come soon enough.
Does it encourage you at all that African popular music like Afrobeats and others are now being seen as being more mainstream? I'm thinking of the Grammys and there being a section of African music. Is that encouraging for you and for the kind of music that you're producing?
Yeah, for me, that's very encouraging. The way we studied playing the violin itself, in Nigeria was we kind of delved into lots of genres aside just playing classical music. And I'm very happy today to say, lots of Afrobeat music. It's mainstream, and majority of the songs you hear that have violins in it are being played by Nigerians, by Africans, by Nigerians, and that's something to be proud of. Like I've played on some of the major African A-list artist songs, that are online today, and that's something to really be proud of. And it's amazing that Afrobeat is really making mainstreams in like that.
All right, and tell us about your latest project, because I know that you've done a series of concerts here in London, and you've also been in the recording studio.
Yes. For now, I don't know if you know about the NOK Orchestra website. We just launched their website on the day of our performance on the 17th, and with Moho. That was really amazing. So for now, we're just trying to create lots of content, for the website and all of that. We did a couple of videos, video shoots and audio shoots, and it's been really amazing because it's the first time I'm having such kind of African recording going on, so to speak. Like Vincent said earlier, it's something that is serious. It's like you're playing classical music, but there's more to it. Like it's really serious, and you have to give it all it takes.
And what about funding? I mean, what about the practicalities? Tunde, I guess this is for you, really, isn't it? About taking your orchestra on the road. It is not cheap, right?
It is definitely not cheap. Yeah, that's the big question. I think over the last few years, where a lot of the players have come over, there's been support from. Some of them are closely connected with their church, and so there was a lot of support from their church, which was very helpful for them to come over, because at one point there was a lot of players. There was like 12 players that came over the last 3, each time, and that is a big undertaking. So we've had partnerships with the church and with other organizations in Nigeria to help to help with that. But it's always an ongoing thing, to be honest. I think now what we're looking at is that we have the quartet, the NOK Quartet, and we have the NOK Orchestra. And so now that we're looking at recording, and we finished, we're just finishing these recordings and these videos, and the idea is then to start touring. It will have to be that the numbers will have to be quite small initially, just for practical reasons to make that work. But it's possible. I mean, the recordings we've done, we can do between 4 to 7 musicians and still recreate what we recorded. So I think it's manageable.
What about support from the Nigerian government? What about support from the African Union?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
I mean, I think right now we will look at, obviously, the funding of these things will have to be addressed in the long term. I think also because we're in a position where we can tour, we're now in that place and we have recordings and things. I think that will make it easier and more viable to approach institutions and organizations for funding, because it is very unique. I mean, there's not anything really like it at present from the continent, I can say.
Indeed. And what about touring to other parts of Africa? What about going to Ethiopia, for instance?
Definitely. I mean, that's definitely things we will look at. South Africa as well is a place I've been a few times, and that I think will be of interest. And certainly the Americas, South America, as well as North America, Europe, and Asia. Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential to take it all around the world, because I said it's an original sound, and it's quite distinct. And obviously a lot of people have interest in classical music, but then this is something that's familiar but also very different.
Indeed it is. It's been described as transcendental, and I must say it's a fabulous sound that you guys are producing. So can I say a big thank you, guys, very much indeed. I was talking to Tunde Jegede, David Etim and Vincent Haastrup of the NOK Orchestra, and you've been hearing a sample of some of their newest music. You can find out more about these guys on their website, www.nokorchestra.com, and NOK, by the way, is NOK. Well, that's it for this episode 12 of Africa Here and Now, and that completes our first season of the podcast. We're taking a break over Easter to get ready for our next season. Let us know what you've enjoyed about season 1 and what you'd like to hear more of. Our website's the place to get in touch, www.AfricaHere&Now.com. There you'll find all 12 episodes, and there are some interesting blogs too that have been written by leading experts on issues like Haiti and South Africa's case against Israel at the ICJ. If you'd like to support what we're doing, please make a donation. There's a facility for that on the website too. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, Africa Here and Now Podcast. We're on Facebook, on Instagram, and of course wherever you get your podcasts. You can email me, Martine at AfricaHere&Now.com. I'm on X, on Twitter, Insta and Facebook too. We recorded our chat with Tunde, David and Vincent on Tuesday the 5th of March. Our thanks to them. Our producer is Anne Busby. We had help from Tyler Hilton. Our original music is by Enric Adam. Anna de Wolf Evans put it all together. From all of us at Africa Here and Now, thank you for your company. We'll be back with season 2 before you know it.